So I did my presentation on Harriet Ann Jacobs, who was an enslaved woman during the 17th century. She wrote her slave narrative or emancipatory narrative titled The Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, where she recounted her life as a slave and the hardships she endured. But so what? Why should we care about what she said? Well, let me tell you and let me inform you. Harriet's narrative highlights the unsolicited harassments that slave girls had to endure, the effects of slavery that had not only on black women, but on white women as well, and how slavery was a communal shackle, not just about one's own freedom, but everyone else's. Point number 1. So Harriet Jacobs had to endure a lot of sexual harassment and sexual advances from her master, Dr. Flint. And she understood that if he wanted to, sexually attack her, rape her, something of that nature, he could have. But instead, he would whisper these advances in her ear and, come on to her. And he wanted her to come willingly. He wasn't going to just outright attack her. But instead, he wanted her to do it on her own. He wanted to own her mind, not just her body. He already had rights to her body, but he wanted to own her mind as well. And Harriet knew this, so she knew she had to play it. There was a game. She understood that she was not his victim, but she was his enemy. And you had to fight your enemy. So one thing I found very interesting that what she did is she ended up having 2 children by a white lawyer, and she took control of the situation the best she could. She was not going to allow Dr. Flint to take her body, but she knew at this point she did not own it 100% because she was a slave, but she knew what she was going to do with it. She wasn't going to let just anyone do it, and if she was going to have say over who did what to it. Point number 2. So when she comes in contact with her new mistress, the mistress of the house that she was in, and Dr. Flint was coming on to her and obviously sexually attracted her and wanted her, Mrs. Flint could see that, and instead of being upset at Dr. Flint or the obvious reason, she would take it out on Harriet. And I think that says a lot about not just what slavery does to black females or did to black females or did to black women, but also the psychological toll that it had on white women as well. Their husbands, their significant others are lusting after women that live in your house, that work for you, and there's nothing they can really do about that, because if a slave woman had no right, the white woman had no right either. Women did not have rights in that time, and they kind of had to look the other way. They knew where their husband was going in the middle of the night. They knew they were going to the slave quarters, and she couldn't do anything. And when he was done there, he came back and got in bed with her, and that has to mess with the woman's psyche anyway. And point number 3. So Harriet Jacobs is the first woman to write an emancipatory narrative or a slave narrative. Before that, it was just men, as like Frederick Douglass or Alonzo Equianos. Like they would, free them. They were the first people to write slave narratives, and they were single, and they were searching for their own individual freedom, and their narrative would, inspire others to get their freedom. But in the sense, they were freeing themselves only. And, there's nothing wrong with that, obviously, but in the case of women, majority of women, did have kids, with their slave masters, by their slave masters. And the slave masters would often use the kids as bargaining tools or just tools in general to dangle over the women's head so they wouldn't leave. And so she understood that slavery was a communal shackle. It wasn't just let me get my own freedom. Let me, emancipate myself. It's let me emancipate myself and my kids. because they were a part of her. And I feel as though that was probably in the case of a lot of women slaves of that time. They probably had the opportunity to get free, but they couldn't leave their kids, or their kids were at another plantation or being held here, and they couldn't, and they had to stay because what mother wants to leave their kids? And so I think that speaks to a feminist nature, because that was not something that was talked about. It was, oh, free yourself.
So what does that have to do with today?
In this day and age, we don't have to hide away in attics if we're being, held against our will or attacked. We, in this day and age, it's different, and our experiences are different because we have that freedom of speech, to a certain extent. There are still, we still have some things to work on, obviously, but in the bigger picture, women now can speak out against the evil acts that are done to them. People of high status and high stature with power who believe that their power puts them above the law, puts them above laws of nature, and they can do whatever they want to people because they have money, or because they're a man, and because a woman dressed like a certain way, or because she acted a certain way, they can do stuff like that. And in Harriet's time, it was true. If a man bought you, you were his property. In the perfect world, in the perfect sense, looked at as equals. So a man cannot just go up and grab a woman. That's not right. So that's how, it applies today, how different the experiences are. And, I think we've made strides, bigger strides than Harriet probably would have went through. So women do have a right to they have the freedom of their speech, they have a right to their body, and when those rights are broken, people do pay justice.